we know that 40-50% of the patients on chronic therapies, they discontinue within couple of years, and it's not because of the therapy fail, it's because of the experience, right? Sometimes there are missed refills, sometimes there is no follow-up, sometimes there's confusion. That's the whole reason. So what are you doing differently in your organization which will make sure that the patients being stable, they are still continuing in the therapy?
Yeah. No, I think you are actually hitting the nail on the head, because that is one of the biggest challenges that this industry has. And as I said, honestly speaking, Jazz, if we were having this conversation even 5 years ago, no one would think that men's health, women's health, especially in the age where at least I have reached, is a concern, right? And nobody paid attention. Nobody was even willing to talk about men's health, women's health, hormone replacement therapies, testosterone, and so on and so forth. So I'm actually personally very happy that we are in a time where people are talking about it and taking steps about it to be able to take care of themselves, from obesity to derma to everything around that, because I think these are critical, life-threatening diseases. And if taken care of, one can actually have a very, very healthy and positive life post those. And I know of so many experiences and so on. But I think you bring up a very good point. And I think the reason for that is, one, it requires personal conviction and strength to be able to go and start doing this process. But more importantly, you also need an ecosystem to be supportive. But the problem is, you at least took the strength to be able to take that route, but somebody else is still not comfortable doing that because it's still a taboo, or it's still not very guaranteed, because we still do not have enough data points on the after effects or the reactions or what could be repercussions of using some of those therapies and so on and so forth. Or at the same time, forget the negatives, think about the positives, right? As I said, if people do not know that thousands of people have made their lives much better by using some of those, the thousand others will never come into this picture, right? So I think we have to do a much better job of highlighting the success, because success begets more success. So I think one of the biggest reasons in my own mind is that people are not aware on how successful these things are. If somebody talked to you or me personally in a friend circle about Ozempic or GLP-1 or whatever, it is actually looked upon as a negative thing. People don't even want to talk about that. But the reality is, it is changing patients' lives. And I've spoken to patients who tell me that they are much more healthy, they're eating much better, they're much more fit, they're much more active. So I think we need to bring that story rather than somebody using GLP-1 as a treatment, right? It's okay to do that as long as their life becomes better. So I think it's my job as a chief customer officer to be able to highlight a lot of those things, so that many more patients, many more providers actually are encouraged to do a lot more of these compared to not doing enough. But I think then what you talked about is very important. Once you start taking it, then is there confidence enough to be able to sustain that? Can you adhere to that, have second dose, third dose, and so on? And that's where I personally see a lot of patients falling off, because the confidence is not there. But bigger piece there is that there's no community for me to provide me that confidence, or be there as my sounding board, or be there to support me through my journey. I have to be there as a pharmacy in that patient's journey. But I believe if I can bring 50 more patients in that journey along with that patient, then you have a cohort of patients together who can talk through it, who can talk about the positives, who can talk about the challenges, who can overcome those challenges and so on. So again, I'm thinking of this as more from the adherence part of the customer journey that I was talking about, on how we can ensure that we are able to enable and let our customers know with a lot more knowledge, a lot more material, because the research and material is not enough. So if you are taking some medication, you may not be confident enough after taking first dose, and you haven't seen the impact, and you're already worried about the negative repercussions, you're going to drop off. And actually, we see a lot of patients fall off, actually as high as 50% plus patients fall off after the second dose and so on. So I believe that, one, they need a lot more enablement, information, and coaching around how to use those medications right. The second bit that they need is they need a community along with them, right? So I'm using my team to be able to make sure that when patients and providers come on board, how we can support them in their whole journey, not just from getting the medication, but also in sustaining and adhering to that medication. The second thing that we haven't started yet, it's been only 8 weeks that I've been here, but second thing I want to bring in is that digital side of the house, where we want to bring communities where people can come and talk about these things, and we can support those communities with enough information. And that's my last point. We need to do a lot more communication. It's not marketing, it's communication and sharing of knowledge, both about the benefits and the success stories and so on. So I think those are my three-pronged approach on how I want to handle that going forward.
Yeah, I completely agree to all of the points you have mentioned, because if you talk about GLP-1, when I was reading through it and even when I heard it before, I was not very confident. I was like, how people can take this? And that kind of community is still lacking, where people go and talk
True.
about the positives. So I think the drop-offs are happening because people are not getting confidence. They are not sure
Yes.
that if it is really going to work after one dose, second dose. But then when I hear from certain people, those who have taken in my group circle itself, it's like great, working like a charm for them.
No, I think you bring up a good point again, because I think initially when we started, and even as recently as last few years, we've been focused a lot about which medication, which combinations we can bring in, which are going to be important for the market. But as you grew more and more, you start realizing that these are actually solutions or areas of treatments that we actually need to start focusing on. And I think that's how now we are starting, or we are going to start talking more about men's health, women's
Hmm.
health, hormone replacement therapies, Dharma as a section. All of these things to me are the areas where patients are needing help, rather than just talking about GLP-1, because GLP-1 by itself could be a weight loss drug, but
Yeah.
weight loss, if supplemented by, let's say, NAD levels, testosterone, by the right fitness levels, and so on, can have a much more positive impact on your life and lifestyle going forward, and so on. So I think we need to start changing our communication from just specific compounds that we probably have been focusing a lot more on. Because even if you think about it today, whether it's Novo Nordisk or Hims and Hers talking about, hey, this pill is here, I think to me that actually becomes a more of a marketing blitz than
Mhm.
really a customer focused, patient focused communication. And what we want to talk about is those are the areas of solutions that we want to take forward, because those areas in my mind are important. As I said, when women reach an age where menopause, premenopause, post, I think those stages are very critical and they need
Yeah.
support. The problem is nobody has talked about that. So if I just come with one medication, then you may think, oh, that's one medication, but that's one benefit. But I talk
Hmm.
about the whole stage of a woman being in that stage and what
The
all do
whole
you
life
need.
cycle,
That to
basically.
me is a lot more
Hmm.
patient conversation than a medicine conversation. And as we kind of talk in the technology industries, always focus on the problem, then go for the solution. I think we probably lead with our products, but we want to lead with the problems, more so going forward. So I think in my mind, that's going to become more important. We're going to pick up the problem areas. We're going to pick up the treatment areas, which are going to be critical, and then make sure we have the right lineup of medications in every single field of that. Because that I think will also help with the larger adoption. Because nobody wants to
Exactly.
talk about GLP-1, but if you talk
Hmm.
about men's health, every man is interested. If you want to talk about women's health, every woman is interested. And I was actually having a conversation with, just like you said, I was talking to somebody who lost more than 100 pounds of weight using some of the medication that they took from us. But it was not just medication, it was the right lifestyle, it was physical activity, it was right habits. So I think it required a lot broader solution than just medication. So we
The
want to
whole
come with
support model, basically, right?
absolutely the whole support model. So I think if you talk about the problem areas, then we can talk about solution areas, and medications become just one part of it. Right. So I think that's how I think about that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think that's a great model. I would say that, because if you're supporting patient even after the therapy for a certain number of years or so, they are more
Yes.
happy, they feel connected, and then they get confidence, and that's how the community is built. It's a slow process, but a growing and a very trustworthy process.
Yeah,
So
I think it builds loyalty. I mean, even though I know
yeah.
people, when you talk to leaders like myself, we'll talk a lot about loyalty, because I think it's become a buzzword from an industry standpoint, and I absolutely care about loyalty. But to
Mm,
me, loyalty is not forced. Loyalty is earned, and
mm,
loyalty is earned by the trust, the credibility, and so on and so forth. So I think that exactly whatever you said actually is loyalty, right? So I'm not here to drive loyalty, but I'm here to make sure that we are credible partners for patients and providers in their journey, because loyalty will just come along. And once loyalty comes along, then they will be here with us years over years and bringing a lot more customers and so on. And that goes
absolutely.
with the yes. So I don't
Mm,
go behind the matrices. I think I focus on doing the right things to deliver the right outcomes.
yeah, absolutely. When you think about the predictive customer success, right? What are the early signals you trust the most?
Now that's actually very, very, a big space. And I think I always think about this because it can change by industry and so on. But in my mind, I always think about it from a philosophy standpoint of breaking it
Hmm.
down. What are your lagging indicators and what are your leading indicators, right? So I will not probably name one or two facets here and there, but I will just say that I always start thinking, first and foremost, I say to Sean all the time that I'm your first customer advocate in this company, right? So anything that happens to the customer, anything that can mar the customer experience, to me is the leading indicator. Ultimately,
Mhm.
yes, the customer satisfaction, the customer effort score, which we all in the industry have become so comfortable, monitoring and measuring, in my mind, are lagging indicators, right? We
Mm.
worry about those indicators after the fact that they have happened. But to me, just the patient not receiving the medication on time, or just the quality of medication not having the right impact, are the leading indicators whether they like you or not. So I think I tend to divide my own scorecard into lagging and leading indicators. Rest, I'm not preaching any customer success leaders on this, listening to this podcast, saying that lagging indicators are not important, because they are, because they help us in taking broad actions for our organizations more broadly. But I think leading indicators need to be controlled right at the onset, because that's what matters the most from a customer standpoint. And as I said, because our customers are direct customers, we can't wait for that feedback to come from our customers who are going to deploy my software. In this
Mm.
case, those customers are having our medication and so on. So I think to us, the signals are very clear. I mean, to your point, churn rate, I mean, I know companies sweats about it from a revenue standpoint, but I
Yeah.
sweat about it more because one patient lost is one opportunity lost. It's, I
Yeah.
mean, absolutely revenue. So I worry about that. But I think to me, I start focusing on my customer matrices from a leading indicator standpoint. And if you've been watching me through my journey, I always have believed that you can't make your patients or customers happy if your own people are not happy, right? So I always
Mm.
say happy employees equals happy customers. So I also look at the leading matrices from my own team, right? What my teams are telling me in terms of their own satisfaction. Are they having the least effort? Are they spending less effort on the work they're doing or not? Because if not, then they're not going to make my customers happy. So I think I apply a lot of technology fields principle, but then I start worrying about my customers and their leading matrices.